All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So, thank you for joining us today. We're excited to talk about what's worth keeping with author Kaya McLaren. Please post your questions about our discussion in the chat, and we'll get to them at the end of the program. Kaya lives on the eastern slope of the Cascade Mountains in Washington State, where she writes and teaches middle school art. In her spare time, she loves to hike and stand-up paddleboard with her dog Frida, as well as bicycle, ski, kayak, and visit as many national parks and hot springs as possible. So welcome. We're so excited to have you. Do you want to start by, if there's anything else about yourself you'd like to tell us, talk about the book a little bit, and then maybe read a short passage?
Okay, that sounds great. Well, this book began as a completely different book, which I wasn't really feeling good about how it was going. But I turned it in and I was going forward with it. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it was after my third chemo that I got some editorial feedback about it. And I just didn't care about anything in that moment. And I sure didn't care about this book. And I couldn't quite figure out what I wanted to do about it. Like, did I want to buy my way out of my contract? Or did I want to honor the contract I had signed and push forward? Or what did I want to do? So I took some time to think about it, and I realized I need to rewrite this book. I just need to rewrite it and make it really good. And so I put my main character in this moment that I was in right after breast cancer. Nobody really told me that I was going to feel the way I felt after I was done with treatment. I mean, I expected to feel nothing but jubilant. And instead, I felt really shattered and disoriented in my own life and in my own body. And so I wanted to talk about that moment. I felt like if I wrote a story about it, then people who have somebody close to them going through that moment, they might understand what they're seeing, because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, in a way it does, but at the moment it seems like it doesn't. Like, why aren't you happy? It's over. Well, because I feel a little bit like a city that's been bombed. Yeah, the war is over, but there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to happen. It can be a little overwhelming.
Did you want to read a little short passage?
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on what would be a good? Otherwise, I'll just start from the beginning. But if there was some passage I wanted to talk about.
No, I think just start from the beginning, maybe like a paragraph or so, and then just to kind of give a taste of the book.
Okay. It was as if an earthquake had hit, and now the contents of Amy Bergstrom's life had fallen out of her closets, cupboards, and shelves and drawers and onto the floor. Sometimes this was quite literal, like the pile of summer clothes that had lain folded and dormant in a storage bin in the back of her closet all winter, but now sat next to her full-length mirror, where she courageously tried on each and every much-loved shirt and dress to see whether it would still fit now. Her guesses about many pieces had been wrong, and relief filled her each time she discovered that she could still wear a piece that had been a favorite. Her long tan coat embroidered with flowers, her maroon and black beaded cocktail dress, 3 white summer shirts with eyelets and embroidery, sporty knit sundresses with built-in padding where her breasts used to be, a long yellow halter maxi dress that had made her feel like a bit like a character in a Greek mythology, 2 peasant shirts. Of all the things that were still worth keeping, she put a few in a large plastic tote she intended to take with her when she left, and hung the rest in her closet, decoys to hide the true extent of her plan. The things that no longer fit would go into the large black plastic bag to take to the thrift store. Heartbroken, she held each piece in her hand, pausing to remember times she had worn it. A dinner out, a birthday party, a family vacation, a special day with her dad back when he could still remember who she was. Then she hugged each piece to her chest before saying goodbye and placing it lovingly in the bag. She had dreaded this task for months. Every part of it was difficult. Letting go, even simply looking in the mirror. She missed her long hair as much as she missed her breasts. Most of the things she needed to sift through, though, however, weren't near. Whoops. Most of the things she needed to sift through, however, weren't nearly as tangible. Relationships, work, identity, even things less tangible than that. Something along the lines of whether she had enough courage to live the rest of her life with the new set of fears she had, knowing how fragile and temporary life was. I think that sometimes all of us, many of us, have an experience that just really rocks us to our core. And in that experience, we fear dying. And when we fear dying, that can easily slip into a fear of living. And so really what this book is about is how three people overcome their fear of dying and their fear of living to embrace life again and live it fully. It's not easy to make peace with life's uncertainties and absolute certainties, you know?
Yeah. And I really thought it was interesting that you told your story from three points of view. Um, and I think for a couple of reasons why I thought it was interesting, in that these type of big events, they don't just affect the person who has the illness or has the the work situation, but they affect everyone. Can you talk about the choice to craft your story from the three different point of views, and what you thought was really important to get across about each character?
I like writing from multiple points of views, and I have in all of my books. I think it's not a bad thing for us to see these stories and see that there are different perceptions, so that in our own lives we can maybe be more aware of the times where we're reacting to something, and that might not even be that person's perception. So I think that writing in this way can help create a little more understanding and a little more peace in the world, maybe. I also think, well, I put her daughter in there because I was thinking a lot about my niece at the time, who, when I was going through it, she was 16. And it was interesting to watch my family digest the news that I had a gene mutation that is genetic, that made me very, very likely to have breast cancer in my lifetime, 70% likely, 70 to 80. And to wonder, well, what do we do now with this information? Do we get tested, or do we let somebody live a normal life where they don't worry about it? What is there a balance in there? And so I just thought it would be interesting to have this young character asking herself these questions that previous generations haven't had to ask themselves. Like, you know, you might have known, oh yeah, breast cancer runs in my family, but it wouldn't quite be the same as knowing you had this an 80% chance, or, you know, whatever the particular gene mutation you had gave you. I think too, Carly is very much the part of me that wondered, how do I live with all of these statistics? How do I navigate this? This is the worst game of Monopoly ever. Like, I can go for hikes and not think about that I have a 5% chance of being eaten by a cougar today, you know, but I have to live with these other statistics. And so she was the part of me that did that. I think that Paul was also a part of me. You know, I needed to continue to be a teacher while I went through cancer treatment. And it was hard. It was really hard. So Paul is the part of me that has to deal with the public and with their pain and their traumas when I'm myself wounded And that's not easy. Another part of Paul is somebody, maybe a couple guys that I dated kind of, I think of them as little puzzle pieces. Like there's some of me and some of them, and I weave it all together into this crazy quilt of a character. But, you know, a man I knew who had been the head of the crisis intervention team at the Seattle Police Department talked about how difficult it was to be a police officer in the urban setting where you're in these military-like situations, you're in these warlike situations, but you never get to come home from the war because the war is in your backyard. And he talked about going to a block party one night and having somebody ask him how his day was and realizing, oh, I actually had to shoot somebody today, but I don't dare say that out loud at this party. That will make me seem like less of a human to them and more of a monster, or, that was his fear. And a fireman that I dated talked about how each call is like getting a drop of mercury, and you never know when you're going to finally reach that limit where it just breaks you. So I've been thinking a lot about these first responders and how traumatized they are, and yet how amazing they are to continue to function and serve in the ways that they can. And I'm not saying that reforms or improvements aren't needed. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I have deep compassion for people who do that work, because I'm not made of that stuff. I couldn't do it.
So I think it's interesting that you wove the Oklahoma City bombing into this story, and that's the trauma that Paul is dealing with. I think kind of being more from the area of where that happened, it's something we kind of talk about, I think, a lot more than maybe the rest of the country. So I thought it was really interesting that was part of your plot point. And can you kind of talk about what made you choose that, and kind of how you kind of researched what you wanted to include and not include about that?
When I lived in New Mexico, I started writing this book when I was living in northern New Mexico. And a lot of people from Oklahoma and Texas would find their way into that part of New Mexico and Colorado. And so it made sense to me that my character would be there from there. And I actually the house in the book really exists. It was across the street from where I was living. And the real owners of them lived in Oklahoma City. So that's kind of what planted the seed. But in my own moment of trauma, I was driving down the road and listening to the kids who had been in the Parkland shooting talk about their trauma. And it really struck me that, oh, it's the same thing. They're going through the same thing. We have different triggers, but we both thought we were going to die, or we both had to try to make sense of something that doesn't make any sense. And we both have to try to figure out a way to feel safe in the world and in our bodies again. And so in that moment, I really realized, regardless of how the trauma was created, I think our way out of it is very similar. I have a colleague who is from Oklahoma City, so I was able to ask her for a lot of information, and she had kept all of the newspapers about it. And so I read all of these articles, and oh my goodness, the journalism was exceptional. I was really impressed with those journalists, because what a horrific story to tell. Horrific.
So, well, and I just think it's funny. I have to comment on this. So I originally am from like the northern part of Texas, that actually kind of is the little square part that sticks up at the top. And growing up, we spend a lot of time vacationing in Red River and that kind of whole area of New Mexico. So it is very true that there are lots of Texas transplants and Oklahoma transplants in that area, because it's actually closer to go there than it is to go anywhere else in the state. So I think that's kind of really interesting. The kind of how you kind of decided to figure out where they were from and that sort of stuff. And I also really enjoyed all the discussions about the national parks. So obviously from your biography, it's something that you enjoy, but talk about why, what you love about them, but also why you decided that you would kind of make that kind of her odyssey to kind of figure out her place in the world now.
When I was a kid, I had one of my best friends was Kari Morrison, and her dad, Jack, was a 5th grade teacher in the school year and a park ranger at Mount Rainier National Park in the summer. And so that was part of what planted that seed, is that always seemed like a pretty idyllic existence. And so I grew up in the shadow of Mount Rainier National Park, and it's always been a special place for me, and a place that I would seek out if I was in a state of turmoil. And it was, in the season, it's open for a very short season, really. But I also remember this other experience where I was driving. I had just finished a stop on my book tour in San Francisco, and I was driving out to Moab to do a river trip through Canyonlands National Park. And I was looking for a safe place to pull over and sleep in my car I was driving through Nevada, and I really wasn't paying that much attention to where I was. But then I saw a sign for Great Basin National Park, a national park I had no awareness of. And it was just right at the perfect time in the evening, and I pulled over. And when I entered it, I felt like I could exhale. I felt like I knew I was safe there, and like everything in the park knew it was safe there. The trees knew they were safe there. It was, I don't know, it just really affected me. And then I started off my teaching career in in Olympic National Park in Quinault. And those big, big trees really, really have a lot of soul. And so after my mastectomy, I would find myself thinking, God, I would just be okay again if I could be with the big trees. I would be okay again if I could just be with the big trees. And I was too weak to get myself there, for a long time. And I was fortunate to find some big trees here. But when I did make it back there and I hiked through the forest, I just felt like I absorbed the energy of life. And even the hike I took here before I was able to go back there, the butterflies and the wildflowers and the birds, all of it just filled up my empty places. It was wonderful. So I do think there is something to the energy of life, and going into a natural area where there's balance, I think maybe helps us, how do I say this? The picture I get is like when you turn your radio to a new station. It helps me turn the radio to a station where there's balance and peace. So I wanted to suggest that. I think our national parks are really something America did well. I'm so proud of our country for prioritizing this. And I think that there are places where people do some really profound healing, as well as just joyful exploration.
And I love, and it's really interesting because we have a book club with the library that's all on Facebook. And we started it at the beginning of the quarantine, and so they just post back and forth on Facebook about the books that we've chosen. So they've just happened to have chosen this book that I think they started this week, and that before our visit tonight, I was actually kind of just checking Facebook to make sure there wasn't anything I needed to comment on. And everyone is talking about the national parks. and the passport, because apparently this is part of the book, which is a totally different book, that they happen to be reading. And I just thought how interesting that was, that it kind of just lined up that was with everything that was going on tonight. And that you know, I had never heard of the passport thing until I had read your book. And so that's part of the discussion that's going on Facebook right now about, did you know about these? Have you used these? Where have you been? And so I really kind of enjoyed that extra bit of kind of history that maybe a lot of people don't know, particularly, if you live somewhere like where we do, where there's, there are national parks in Texas, but they're not close. So you might not have been to one. And do you have a favorite? Is there one that you think is absolutely don't miss?
Carlsbad Caverns. Love Carlsbad Caverns. It's like going to a whole new planet. I really love that one. Yeah. I always tell people, man, don't miss it. It's like Grand Canyon, wonder of the world, but underground. You'll love it. Yeah. And the passport, what's been really fun about the passport for me is it's caused me to stop at places I would have otherwise maybe driven by, just because I wanted my stamp, which is stupid. But I love that because of that, I've discovered some really wonderful national monuments that are kind of like smaller national parks. Oftentimes they're really, really cool places, really beautiful, maybe a smaller scale. And there's not the crowds. They're just really, and they really break up the road trip, like I get out of my car and I walk more now when I'm on a road trip, and then my back and neck don't hurt. I just enjoy it. So yeah, I like to pass that on.
So somebody that's the book that they're reading is Leave No Footprints by Connor Knighton. Yeah. So
write it down.
Yeah, I just thought that was really interesting and timely, and with everything that we're talking about tonight. So
in Olympic National Park, in the what do we call that? In the Maple Grove, there is a tree that you can crawl inside, and it's enormous, and there is something lovely about being held by a tree.
I love that. I love that a lot.
Yeah.
You kind of previously mentioned this, and I'm gonna kind of backtrack on some things. So, in the last decade, there's been a lot of discussion in the media about genetic testing around cancer, and we've had lots of stories about celebrities making some of the similar decisions that Amy does in the book, to have preemptive surgery based on testing. And I'm assuming that you think it's an important discussion to have. Can you kind of talk about that, or was it more about it was something you were kind of going through at the same time?
Well, because if I hadn't had the gene mutation, I could have had a lumpectomy instead of a double mastectomy. But my odds of getting breast cancer again were 70%. So that was really something that, I had to choose. Am I going to live a life where my full-time job is monitoring whether breast cancers come back? Or am I going to let go of this and live fearlessly? And then I also had a significant risk of getting ovarian cancer. And so I let go of those parts too, because you can't mammogram your ovaries, you know what I mean? You can't stay on top of that. My family, nobody in my family chose to get tested. And this year, a year ago, my mom was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And that broke my heart, because had she chosen to have that information, she could have dodged that bullet. But I think that she was looking at it from a perspective of feeling like if she knew she had it, she would blame herself for my cancer, which makes no sense to me, but I'm not a parent. So, it's complicated. There's a lot of pieces in it. There's just a lot of pieces to it. And my brother said something similar, like he didn't want to get tested because his kids were too young to get tested. And if he had it, he didn't want to wonder. It's just, and he didn't want to blame himself. I mean, it's really interesting to ask ourselves, are we entitled to live a normal life when our lives affect everybody around us? And I wondered a lot about those things, that I have Carly wondering about. If you've got a young person who knows this about themselves, to what degree are they obligated to share that information? To what degree are they not? I mean, I really had all these questions and no answers, but knowing that I had this gene mutation really complicated things. And there's, half a dozen other cancers I have a higher risk of getting, but still not that high. So I just sort of choose not to think about it. But yeah, when I found out, I said on Facebook, like, man, I just want to shoot some pink stuff. And my friend Mike said, come on out. And he went to the thrift store. He bought a bunch of pink stuff. He moved his couch out onto his back porch and covered me in quilts and turned on a heater because it was January and snowy. And then, he reloaded my cowboy revolver for me over and over. And I just shot that pink stuff and it felt really good. Well, I might be a tree hugger, but sometimes there's ways that we.
Yeah. I mean, it's inanimate objects, right? I mean,
yeah.
Yeah. So, well, and I will say, this is actually a conversation and a decision I personally have had to make. I have 3 family members in that close line. My maternal grandmother died in the 60s of breast cancer, and both my mother and one of her sisters have had breast cancer. And so I made the decision to take the test. But it's one of those, that whole conversation that goes through your mind about, okay, am I going to take the test? Am I not going to take the test? And then, okay, I am going to take the test, but what am I going to do if I have that gene? And someone else in my family was like, let's not count our chickens before, let's take the test. Let's see what it says. And then we can have those, big philosophical discussions about what you're going to do. And I think the best part about it is it's a conversation now, right? I mean, my grandmother died in the 60s. She had 7 children. Her oldest child was a junior in high school, and basically, became like the mother in the family. And, it's certainly not, we certainly never talked about that that's what had happened to her. It wasn't until both my aunt and my mother both got breast cancer within 2 years of each other that then it really became the discussion. Well, this is what our mom had, and all the girls in the family should go ahead and get the test because clearly it's kind of running through the line. And interestingly enough, both me and the only other female cousin I have, we don't have the mutation.
How nice to know that you can, cross that off your list of things to worry about.
Yeah.
But, I also want to throw it out to anybody who's listening that if a person did, you don't have to run out and get your body parts chopped off. You can, wait, I shouldn't have said it like that. You don't have to opt for surgery. You can have this middle ground of just more frequent checkups.
Right.
You catch it early. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your doctors will have a different protocol for you and protect you better.
Yeah, and I will say for me, because I already had, I think when I had two in the family, because there was that little gap, it was okay. I started getting mammograms much earlier than you do normally, and then when it was the third person, my doctor was like, no, I want you to go ahead and get the test, and then we can kind of figure out what we're going to do. But I think the biggest thing for me is I'm glad that it's a discussion now, that um, we don't pretend like we don't have to talk about it, and we talk about the choices that, what you're doing individually, and there have been a couple really high profile celebrities who have chosen, I think Angelina Jolie and I always forget her name, but the girl from, shoot,
Christina Applegate.
yeah, that's it. Yeah. And Christina Applegate, and I think what I appreciate about that is that there was a discussion about, living is better than taking the chance, and I'm still who I am.
It's really an interesting thing to think about. Why would I, especially if I was a mother and had children to finish raising, why would I choose these body parts I'm not even using to feed children over my life? Like, it really shows you what a messed up culture we live in, that 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 each of us women know on some level, ooh, our culture values us for these, and you got to fight that. You got to fight that. At least I do. you know Other people, I guess, can profit from it. You can do whatever you want, but
Yeah.
but to recognize, like, wow, the fact that I mean, no amputation is easy, not even something that you don't use, but I don't know. Everybody has to find their own way, I
Right.
suppose.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the best part is that we're having the conversations now,
Mm-hmm.
that we're not we're not hiding it, you know, not hiding it under the rug and not looking at it. We're talking about it. Um, and I also think it's interesting. So you have your character. She puts wrapping paper over the mirrors.
Yeah,
Can you kind of talk about that?
that's what I had to do. Um, After my second surgery, I just felt like I can't cope with this anymore. I was really, first thing in the morning, I just didn't want to see what happened. I didn't want to see what changed. I just wanted to be able to take a shower without seeing everything that changed, because my bathroom mirror is cropped such that it just really highlighted that change. And I didn't want to look at my wounds. I didn't want to look at my scars. I wanted to look at my own soul. And so when I brought the wrapping paper up, it made me focus on my face, on my eyes, on the things that hadn't changed. And it was such a blessed relief to look in the mirror and just think, oh, I know you. I know you. It's good to see you again. And, there was still like months where I would choose to look at the ceiling while I took a shower. Um, and I had a therapist who really thought that was going to make me take longer or whatever to adjust. But what's wrong with that? What's wrong with taking whatever time we need and doing it in our own speed? Why do I have to do it suddenly? Why can't it be more gentle? Why can't it be a more gentle transition? It wasn't that I was in denial. I mean, I was washing my chest in the shower and thinking, heal, 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 body, heal, heal, But I needed to focus on the things that hadn't changed. And that's why it was so wonderful to get a massage and feel all the parts of my body that hadn't changed, or to swim in cold water and feel all the parts of my body that hadn't changed. It's, yeah, everybody does it in their own way, but it was the day I took the wrapping paper down, I knew this is a big step. Good for me. Good for you. making peace with this. Sometimes it does take us a while to make peace with something, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's one of the things I really appreciated about this is because it was, you know, you have to do whatever you have to do that gets you through today and gets you through tomorrow. And in some ways, I really feel like each one of your characters is doing that. It's not just Amy that's doing that. I mean, Amy is definitely doing that, but the other two are doing that as well, right? Paul is doing that by trying to fix that house, and Carly is doing that with the time that she spends with the horses. And it's kind of just whatever gets you through today to keep you down on that path of self-acceptance and kind of working your stuff out.
I
And
think being in the moment is, and we hear a lot about that, and it's, it can be sort of, but I do find that if I'm listening to bird songs, I'm more in the moment and I'm more at peace. Or if I'm aware of the soft earth under my feet, or my dog's soft fur, the smell of a horse, all of those things, music, playing music, all of those things can really comfort us. And I think comfort us in part because it does make us aware of just this moment, just this moment, just this moment. Yeah. Yeah, they each find their way into the present moment. They each find comfort in different things. And I think we need that. When our nervous systems had a big blow, in the case of Carly, Amy's daughter, she's terrified she's going to lose her mom, and she feels powerless, and all of that is still echoing inside of her. And so to be on a horse where you're kind of being rocked back and forth, I oftentimes think when I'm on a horse, I bet I like this because it reminds me of being in the womb when your mom is walking, like, I don't know. I think having our nervous system soothed by music, by nature, by, animals, all those things are good for us. Yeah.
and I think also it's interesting that some of the misunderstandings in the book are because they're not talking to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Carly doesn't want to talk about how she's feeling. Paul doesn't want to talk about how he's feeling. Neither does Amy. And I think that's not unusual, but it also is where you get in a situation where you find very important papers in a drawer that you weren't supposed to see, because no one is talking to each other about.
It's almost like when you break a bone and it's not set properly and it heals wrong. Yeah, silence can be like not setting a bone.
And it's interesting too that it was Amy's aunt who understood that he was not okay, even though Amy lived with him every day and didn't understand that he had never kind of gotten over the trauma of being at the building every day. And it also made me think about like all of those 9/11 people who went back every day for months and months and months. And
high suicide rate.
yep. And the difference that makes in their life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of my police officer friends was saying that or maybe it was a firefighter, can't remember who it was now, but was saying, yeah, there's a stigma. We're afraid of being on record. If I go get counseling, I do it without my job knowing, and I don't use insurance because I don't want any record of it. It's too bad. It shouldn't be that way.
Yeah. I have a friend who was a 911 operator for 5 or 6 years, and she's barely 40. So she was young, like early 20s to early 30s. And even that, I mean, there were definitely like some shootings and things that she was the 911 operator while it was happening. And you know, it's sad that we don't think that getting help is being strong, when actually going and having those conversations with the therapist is also being strong, because it's showing you and helping you kind of move through um, the things that you need to move through and get help.
I can also understand feeling so damaged, like no amount of talking is going to help it, you know, like there's, I think that, and I guess that's what I wanted to suggest in my book too, is like, there's lots of ways to get help. You can get help in nature. You can get help in music. You can get help through the comfort of an animal. I mean, it's not that you shouldn't get help in other ways. I'm not suggesting that, but if you feel like you don't want to talk about it, well, maybe take the first step in some of these other ways. Maybe.
Find the path that works for you.
Yeah.
So, are you working on anything new?
You know, I was, but I haven't lately. And it's because in my third book, do I have it here? In my third book was How I Came to Sparkle Again. And in this book, I had Cassie, she was in 5th grade and had lost her mom to breast cancer. Wrote that before my experience. And she had a best friend, Mauricio, who was fresh from Mexico. And I started to write a sequel where they're both in their senior year and their lives are going in divergent places. But I really liked what I had written. I got about halfway through. But this moment in our culture is very much like being in a room with a propane leak and walking on carpet in socks. Like, as a white woman, what are the rules for what I can write and what I should not write? And is the new rule that I can only have white characters, or is that also a bad thing? Like, is there, I'm just a little bit afraid of causing an explosion that was not intended and came from a very pure place. You know, I'm a teacher. More than half of my students are Hispanic. I've had the student whose parent is deported, and I've left groceries on doorknobs of families that I knew were struggling so that they wouldn't know where the groceries came from, but they might eat, you know? And so I wanted to write a book that would sort of show this isn't a Hispanic community problem. We are all connected. We're all connected. And your pain affects me. And also, you know, I was reading about a young man who initially was in the United States without documentation, and I think he came to get it later. But he invented a blood test for breast cancer that one day may be used. And I think about how much we invest in all of these young people, and if there's not a path forward for them, that's not just hurting them, it's hurting us. We're not capitalizing on our investment. There's some really bright kids that we're lucky to have in our country, in my opinion, and I want to see them have opportunity.
Well, and I mean, I think it is. It's such a fraught conversation right now. But I know there's a lot of discussion in publishing now about sensitivity writers. And I think, or not writers, sensitivity readers, right? I think that you still write the stories, but you have someone else who kind of, you know, does that first read before stuff is published. And then you kind of work out what, you know, what maybe might be thought of as culturally insensitive, right? And then what you can kind of go from there. I mean, it's such there's stories that need to be told, and it's such a hard conversation right now.
It's possible that it's not the moment. It's possible that when there's more diverse voices at the table telling their own stories, that then I can tell a story from my white woman point of view that it won't set off the same amount of sparks. It could be that the intensity will die down. I don't know. It's just lately I've just kind of wanted to be quiet. Like, it just kind of seems like a good time to be quiet, or not to start conversations I don't want to have, or I don't know.
Well, and I think part of that is just the last year or so that we've had. I mean, I like I'm a huge reader, and like this year I've just been like, eh. I'm in a book club that we read a lot of YA. It's all adults, but we read a lot of YA literature. And this month's book, I read 60 pages and just said, yep, nope. And like, I never do that. Like, I read the whole book. I show up to book club. I'm ready to talk. And I was just like, yeah, I can't. I just can't with this.
Yeah.
I'm just so, I think,
Yeah.
I
I've
mean,
had that thought about what's worth keeping, which is just, this has been a time where we as a collective are experiencing intense medical issues. Who's going to want to read a book about intense medical issues right now? Like, I hope that this book doesn't disappear in a few months. I hope that it gets another shot in another moment where people are a little more ready for it. But I think that right now, a lot of us just want something lighter and fun and joyful. I think that this book has a place in this moment because I think that there's a lot of people who are traumatized by COVID experiences, whether it's having it or losing a loved one or just the very painful isolation. I mean, I was at my brother's birthday party this week, and his family was in a pod, and my parents are both vaccinated, and the 6 of them all sat together at a table, and I sat about 30 feet away on a bench by the open front door. And I was glad to be there, and it hurt so much not to be at that table too. It just hurt so much. So I think that a lot of us are going to have healing to do, and I think that what's worth keeping is not really a book about cancer as much as it is a book about healing and living fully.
I would agree with that. It's more so about the journey of how you kind of move, right? That the traumatizing thing could be anything.
Yep.
It happens to be cancer, but it doesn't. It really could be anything, and it's more of a discussion about kind of how you move forward, how you figure out kind of your place in the world and what you're going to do next, and how that's going to work out for you.
I worried initially that this book would trigger people who had been through it. I worried that it would pick scabs. I wanted to have a disclaimer saying like, no, don't give this book to somebody going through cancer. It's for you to read so that you understand something about what they're going through. But then somebody at my publishing house was going through cancer and read it and said, yeah, I had to do it in small bites because it was really close to home, but also it really made me feel seen. And I thought, well, that's powerful. Who am I to say who should and shouldn't read this book? I think that we know when we put our hand on a book, I think we know if this is the book that's going to answer the question in our heart. I don't know how that is, but I think we know. And I think people will know if this is the right book for them or if it's the right book, but the wrong moment,
But I come back to it later. Yeah, I will admit, so like I'm a huge John Green fan, but I haven't read the one, the book that's about cancer, because I think for a long time I was like, yeah, no, I can't do the crying, because everybody I know who's read it is just like, it's such a tearjerker. But I didn't actually feel that way about this one. And there were a couple moments where like I felt sad, but it wasn't that sort of experience for me, I would
Mhm.
say. And so, I think I would just encourage anybody who thinks it sounds interesting to check it out. And nothing says you have to finish it.
Yeah, I think it will be a book that is cathartic for some people. I think it's an important book, and I really hope that it finds the people who will benefit from it, for sure. I as I'm an art teacher, so I'm well aware that there's different reasons to make art. And some of the art I call vomit art, where you're just getting it out. You're just getting out your feelings or whatever. But in the same way that I wouldn't keep a bag of vomit and say, look what I made, I was really feeling it when I made this. This came from a really authentic place. I think we should hang this on the wall. Like, I don't keep my vomit art either, and I don't keep my vomit writing, or at least my editor helps me filter what is worth keeping and what is vomit writing and needs to
Right.
go. That really, I wrote this book from a place of wanting to give encouragement and compassion and understanding to my readers.
Well, and I think it absolutely does that. So,
Yeah.
and we got maybe about like 5 or so minutes left. So I want to, if the audience has any questions, please put them in the chat. And then while we give them a minute for that, I think I'll ask you one more question. So can you kind of talk about your writing process?
Mm. I heard when I first began, when I first began my first book, I didn't intend to finish it or publish it. And it was just a way for me to entertain myself when I was too poor to fix or replace my television that had broken. And so I used to write by hand in the bathtub every night on that book. And then I read books about how to write a screenplay, and that made me more aware of the structure of plot, which thank goodness, because I needed that lesson. And so I did a little outlining, and I was really pleased with my second book. And then I saw an interview with Fannie Flagg where she was talking about how she writes on index cards sort of a summary of each chapter and puts them on a clothespin, on a clothesline with clothespins down her hallway so that she can move them around. And I loved that idea. And so I sort of did something like that. But then when I lived in Mexico and was traveling, I had to go smaller. So I went Postit Notes on a bulletin board for the time being. And I like it because I can have different bulletin boards with different works in progress and, just sort of pick it up, put it down, hide it, bring it out.
Well, and I would say that you're in good company because Walter D. Myers, that is exactly how he would plot things. He did a talk at a conference that I went to one time, and because he would write multiple books at the same time, that's exactly what he would do. Is he would have his little whiteboards with his little sticky notes, and this section would be this book, and this section would be that book, and then he could move them around. So I
I
was just
like
really interesting how people work through how they're gonna do their.
Well, mine is always, I might have some ideas, so I might chart some things in the future, but oftentimes I'll write the Post-it note after I just wrote the chapter and then put it in. And sometimes I'll put a Post-it note to remind myself to write a chapter about this and come back to that later, and I'll put like a special symbol or something on it. But I like that it frees me to skip ahead and write a chapter in the future and then jump back. So if there's something that's flowing that day, I can go with it, but without getting completely unorganized. I really like to write in the summer when I'm on summer vacation and my mind is cleaner, so I'm a little more free. And I like to write outside. I've got this carport that is open on both ends, and I move my desk out there, and it's my office all summer. I like that here in Eastern Washington, it's warm enough in the summer that I can be warm in the shade and, not get sunburnt and still see my screen, but be out there with the life, with my dog and the flowers. And last year I had some pretty aggressive swallows that were I won't be letting them nest there again. I was getting attacked. It was fierce. It was really fierce.
Oh, the perils of writing that people don't know about.
Yeah, no one saw that coming.
Well, I have enjoyed our conversation tonight. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And if you would like to purchase a copy of the book, you can purchase one from the Dock Bookshop here in Fort Worth. It's one of our local independents. And then we have a lot of great author visits coming up for all the way through the summer. And so if you would like to find out what else we have, if you go to fortworthlibrary.org, and underneath the calendar, if you click on the search all programs, you will then see a link for author visits and book signings. And then that will give you a list of what we have upcoming. And we're constantly updating that list. So I think right now we mostly just have through April up, but we'll start adding May's programs here in the next few weeks. So thanks again, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Kaya. I enjoyed it. And
I want to also say I've got other titles, and this one also takes place in New Mexico at a goat ranch and winery. Totally fun. I used to live and teach on the Hickory Apache Reservation, so I wanted to write a little bit about what it was like to live there. So this has a great sense of place, and my Apache friends love it. I worked at a summer camp that almost went under, and a group of women who used to work there kind of saved the camp and inspired this. So even though this is not based on a true story, it's still inspired by women that I met who were changed by camp. Really fun book for a ski town and kind of rowdy. Very sweet book. So those are my last. I have 6. This was number 6, but my last 4 are good.
Well, thank you very much, and everybody have a great evening.